Hi, and welcome to my MASA online seminar. Since we are all stuck at home due to the coronavirus, and I can't invite you to a restaurant and give you a nice meal like I usually do, and I believe this information is so vital to you all, especially now, I've arranged it with MASA so that anybody who views this video in its entirety and sets up a follow-up call afterwards will receive a $25 gift card from MASA. Also, if you receive the link to view this seminar in an email, I've also sent you my printable client packet that I usually give to everybody when they come to my in-person meetings in restaurants. And if you've printed that and you have it handy to follow along with during the seminar, then I want to remind you that on the back page of that is a notes section that you can use to jot down any questions you might have during the presentation so that I can address them during the follow-up call with you. And if you got this link by Facebook or sent to you from another person and you don't have that handout, just have a notebook handy to jot down your questions. It's not imperative that you've printed out that paperwork. And also, if you're listening to this webinar, and you've heard about MASA before, or you're ready to go ahead and do a MASA membership, if at any time during this presentation you would like to just call me directly, we're going to be waiting on standby on the phone, so I want to give you an opportunity to jot down my number. So I'm going to just pause for just a second here and give you a chance to get your pen and paper if you haven't done so already. Okay, my number is 321-443-6839, and as long as you're watching this between 8 a.m. and 10 p.m., you can give me a call at that number, and I'll be glad to answer any questions that you have. And if you want to sign up for a MASA plan, you can do that. If not, once I've answered your questions, I'll get your address information of where we should send your $25 gift card to. And so now that I've got all of my housekeeping done, I'm going to go ahead and get started with this seminar. And the first thing I'm going to do is share my slides on your screen so you can see what I'm talking about. Okay, if you're just joining the seminar, my name is K.Gobeli. I'm a sales manager for MASA for the state of Florida. And for the last 14 years, I've also been a professional senior advocate known to my clients as the senior dog. My specialty has always been medical billing mediation for regular medical bills, for medical transportation bills, and also I aggressively go after anybody that is ripping off a senior for any reason. I am also a VA benefit specialist trained through the American Legion and VFW. And because the state of Florida holds MASA under the insurance umbrella, I am also a licensed insurance agent for the state of Florida. And one of the main reasons that I do these presentations, and I actually felt it was so important to go ahead and get my insurance license so that I could offer this to my clients, my friends, and my family members, was because one of my senior advocacy clients got one of the flyers in the mail from MASA advertising a lunch and learn. And they asked me, since I was their senior advocate, if I would mind going to that seminar and posing as their daughter so that I could give them my opinion as to whether or not they should purchase a MASA plan or not. And when I went to that presentation with them, light bulbs went off in my head because I began to realize why my senior clients were getting these medical transportation bills really starting in 2010. And, prior to that, if I got a medical transportation bill for somebody, I could make 2 or 3 phone calls. I could usually have it resolved. But from 2010 on, it sometimes took 20 to 30 phone calls per bill. And often I was no longer winning my arguments. My clients were still responsible for either all or most of that medical transport bill because Medicare changed rules and regulations regarding to how they view medical transportation. So, that really motivated me. And also I learned if they had had MASA plans, they wouldn't have had those bills. and neither would I have had those bills, because I'm very passionate about this topic. Since about 24 years ago, I had 2 medical transportation bills, one for each of my 2 children, within a few weeks of each other, that my insurance let me down and didn't pay. At the time, my husband and I had the most expensive Blue Cross and Blue Shield insurance that money could buy. And unfortunately for us, when our first daughter had her ride, she was 4 years old. She was burned over 18% of her body because our stovetop in our brand new RV collapsed. It was defective. And she happened to be standing at the refrigerator, which, if you're an RVer listening to this, you know that that refrigerator is located very close to the stove most of the time in an RV. Not always, but a lot of the time. And she was sent by air flight from Zephyr Hills to Tampa, because that's where the nearest level 1 trauma center to us in Zephyr Hills happened to be. And even though she absolutely needed to take that ride, unfortunately, because she wasn't burned over 20% of her body, only 18, the insurance guidelines did not view that as being a medically necessary trip. They said she could have taken another means of transportation and had the same outcome. So they left us with a $33,000 air ambulance bill that we had to figure out how we were going to pay. And a couple weeks later, probably less than that, it was days, I think, I went into premature labor with our second daughter, and Zephyr Hills did not have a neonatal intensive care unit. So unfortunately, they had to transport her by ground ambulance to Lakeland Regional, where the nearest neonatal intensive care unit was, which happens to be a level 2 medical center. And even though it was medically necessary, and Blue Cross did not argue that that was medically necessary, it was an out-of-network ambulance for our insurance, and that left us with a balance bill for her ride of $16,000. So if you add those 2 bills up, we faced $49,000 worth of medical transportation debt, and we ended up finally having to go to a bank and get a loan and paying that off over time. And as I was sitting listening to the MASA presenter that day that I was spying on the presentation, I began to realize not only would I not have had those bills had I had a MASA presentation, my clients that were being forced to pay unfair medical transportation bills, they wouldn't have had their bills either. And I also began to imagine what would happen to somebody who was 70 or 75 years old if they got a bill like that. How would they pay it? So, you know, these are the things that really motivated me to become a MASA presenter, and that's why I'm doing this online presentation for you today. So what I want to do is explain to you what MASA is. MASA stands for Medical Air Services Association, and MASA has actually been in business since 1974. We are nationwide, we are worldwide, and our slogan is any ground, any air, anywhere. And what we mean by that is, we don't care what medical transportation company performs your emergency medical transportation. We don't care if you end up taking a ground ambulance, if you go by helicopter, or even fixed wing aircraft across the country. We don't care if you are at home where you live 365 days a year because you've never been out of your hometown in your life, or if you're an avid traveler and you're always on the road. Wherever you happen to be when you have your emergency situation, if you take a ride and you get a bill, or you need assistance, you know, which we will go over all the benefits very shortly, then MASA is actually going to be there for you no matter where you happen to be. So what does MASA actually do? Well, in case of an emergency, MASA gives you the peace of mind of being able to pick up that phone and calling 911 and not hesitating and worrying what the cost of that ride might be. Because MASA covers all bills, both in and out of network, even if your insurance denies the claim as not being medically necessary. We don't own any of the ground or the helicopter ambulances that you might take, because the idea is for the best medical care that can serve you at the moment when you're having your emergency, the most qualified professionals, you know, the best ambulance and the quickest care is what you get. So if you are even somewhere remotely and some very strange named helicopter company comes and performs your emergency transport, MASA is still going to cover that bill. We want you to get the quickest medical care and not worry about having to call us and get permission before you take the ride. You don't have to contact MASA until you get the bill. So the MASA membership benefits that are included in every single level of MASA membership is what I'm going to explain to you now. I'm going to start off at the top here with emergency transportation, both ground and air. What that means is anytime that you perceive that you are having a medical emergency, it doesn't matter what your insurance company says after the fact. If you believe or your doctor believes that you're having a medical emergency, either one, and you take any form of emergency medical transport, MASA is going to cover the cost of that ride. The next thing down is non-emergency transportation. That's right here. And when you would use non-emergency transportation is when you're traveling away from home. So just so you know, if you're anywhere away from home and you find yourself an inpatient in a medical facility and you would like to not be cared for there, but you would like to be transported back home for your own doctor to care for you, the only reason that we need to have to allow that to transfer to occur is that your doctor, that's where you want to end up at, agrees to receive you at that end. As long as you have a doctor to come home to, we're going to be more than happy to transport you, and we're going to cover the cost of that. But if you decide you want to stay where you are because you like that hospital, or maybe you're so ill or injured that it's a few days before you can be stabilized enough to be transported back home, then you may be staying in that strange hospital for a little while. And if that's the case, the people who are traveling with you, they need to go back to a hotel or to an RV or to someone's house, and they need to get a good night's rest. They can't just put toothpicks in their eyes and stay awake 24/7 at your bedside. And, you know, when does a doctor usually do their rounds? In my case, they've done them at 5 a.m., they've done them at 11 p.m., you just never know. And so you might be on medications, you might be groggy from sleep, but it's kind of nice to have somebody at your bedside all day long and all night long that you're familiar with, so that even if maybe it's just because the nurse, you push the call button and she's not able to come right away, they can go get you a drink of water or something. So these are, you know, what we do is we'll send a plane ticket to any one person of your choice, whether they're related to you or not, even if you have people traveling with you, so that that extra person can be flown to your bedside to be that extra trade out person for when you're an inpatient in the hospital. And down below that, we have escort transportation and minor children and grandchild return. Now, if you are traveling with somebody that you are the caregiver of that person, maybe they have dementia, maybe they're disabled, maybe they are minor children or grandchildren. If you're in the hospital bed, you shouldn't be worrying about who's taking care of them. If they're, maybe you had an older teenager and that one is trying to take all the other kids down to the waiting room, you don't want to have to be worrying about that. So MASA will send those kids or those elderly people that you're taking care of, they'll send them back home with an escort. But if they're afraid to go home with a stranger, then we will again send a plane ticket to somebody that they're familiar with, fly them to where they are, and then fly them all back home, so that that is the last thing on your mind, is worrying about the people that you were responsible for taking care of, because now you're being taken care of. The next one down is vehicle return. Now, whether you have a car, a boat, a motorcycle, or an RV, we're going to be there. If you can't get your vehicle home because of your medical emergency, we're going to get your vehicle home for you. Now, about a month ago now, we've been in this social distancing for so long, I'm beginning to lose track of time, but I had a seminar not long ago that there was a husband and wife that were RVers, and the husband yelled out, "Hey, my wife could drive my RV home if I end up in a medical emergency. What do I need MASA to drive my RV home?" Well, the wife answered that right away. She said, "Hey, if you're having a medical emergency, I don't want to be trying to rush home with the RV and make it there in time. I want to be on the medical transport with you, being transported at the same time. And if MASA covers getting the RV home, let them take it home. So that's the same with all vehicles. And just so you know, if you're not comfortable with the way we want to transport your vehicle home, then we will send a plane ticket to somebody that you approve and fly them to where your vehicle is and then pay their expenses getting your vehicle home. So at MASA, we're all about taking care of you the way that you want to be taken care of. Pet return. If you have a pet that's been traveling with you and you've had a medical emergency and now you can't care for that pet and you need that pet to get home, we don't care what the pet is. It might be a cat or a dog, but you know, I've got clients who have very unusual pets, such as iguanas or rhesus monkeys even. So if you have one of those unusual pets, or you have your regular everyday standard cat and dog or horse, you don't have to worry. We're going to get your pet home if you can't take care of them due to a medical emergency. The next thing down the list is organ transportation and organ recipient transportation. Now, those are the only two benefits that require you to be a MASA member for at least 1 year to take advantage of. Sometimes people will say, well, you know, why would I ever need this? Well, if you're on the transplant list right now, you probably already know why this is a necessary benefit, because the Red Cross no longer moves anything other than tissue and bone marrow. So if you are receiving an organ and that organ is coming to you from more than 2 hours away, that cost is on the patient to get that organ to themselves now. And most insurances don't cover that. So that's why a lot of transplant patients have the GoFundMe account to raise the money just in case that issue would come up. If you're a MASA member for at least a year, that is not something that's going to be a worry of yours. You're going to have the peace of mind of knowing that MASA is going to get that organ to you, or we're going to get you to where the organ is if that seems to be more appropriate for your case. The next thing down on this list is repatriation. Repatriation means if you're outside of the continental United States and you find that you need to be transported back for medical care here in the United States, we do have private planes that manned with doctors and nurses that will get you back to the United States to the doctor of your choice, and we can do that relatively quickly. And the last thing on that list is mortal remains transport. Now, when I'm doing my in-person seminars, I sometimes have people who will share their personal experiences about this. But just so everybody knows, on this online seminar, the typical time period today that it generally takes to get a deceased person's remains back into the United States, it's not a week or 5 days, you guys. It's about 3 months, because drug dealers have gotten crafty and they now hide bags of drugs into body cavities and sew them back up. And when customs used to open the casket just to look for the body, they never actually inspected the body. And now, unfortunately, because a few criminals have ruined it for everybody, bodies now get delayed coming back into the United States at customs, no matter if they're coming from Italy or France or Mexico. It really doesn't matter. They have to fully inspect that body before it can be brought all the way back to the funeral home here for burial and a funeral service. So if you're a MASA member, we typically can get your body back in much less time. Our typical time period is right around 8 to 10 days. So we can get your body back much more quickly because we can make those arrangements and cut through some red tape that otherwise would delay your body coming back from a foreign country. So all those membership benefits that I just went over with you on this screen are the ones that are for every single level of MASA membership. Now, this screen that I'm showing you are the additional lifetime membership benefits that exist for every level, or sorry, only for the lifetime membership. So I'm going to start with this one. So if you're a lifetime member of MASA, MASA is going to send you a My ID Hive medical ID bracelet kit. Now that kit comes with a bracelet, a keychain, a sleeve that goes over an existing watch band, just a small little thing that fits right where it closes and opens. There is a wallet card, and it also works as an app on your phone. Why this is so vitally important for you is that every one of the devices in the My ID kit has on it a QR code. And that QR code can be scanned by medical professionals worldwide, and they can then gain access to who your doctors are, what your health conditions are, what medications that you take. Maybe you have a change in medication often because you're on a blood thinner. Well, you can go online in real time or call me or call the MyID company, and that information can be updated instantly so that anytime you have a medical emergency, those paramedics or doctors, they know all of your current health information. We even include on there what your supplements are, because if you're taking turmeric, garlic, or fish oil on a daily basis, you're taking a blood thinner. If you're having a stroke and they're contemplating giving you clot busting medications, they want to make sure that they know everything that you're taking, because if they give you just a little bit too much blood thinning medication, then you're going to maybe bleed out. Your higher chances of having internal bleeding really go up. So we don't want that to happen to anybody. So your supplements are listed there. Your blood type is listed there. All your emergency contacts, your previous health history, your family health history, all of that stuff. And if you happen to be someplace very remote, maybe you're on an African safari, for instance. Our clients travel everywhere and they don't have a scanner on their phone, or they don't have cell signal where you are, then they can certainly use a satellite phone and call the phone number, or they can go online if they have the ability to do that and go to the website for MyID. Anytime somebody needs to access this or they scan that bracelet, they have to put in information that proves they're a medical provider. That way, nobody who's a stranger could steal your protected health information, you know, if you lose that device somewhere. So you are safe and secure having this device with you wherever you go. Also, lifetime members receive attorney advisory service, a cash advance of up to $50,000. Now, why would you need that cash advance? Well, if you're traveling outside of the continental United States and you end up in a medical facility that does not take your insurance, if you overnight, you can rack up a hospital bill, $35,000 or $40,000. I had a lady in one of my seminars in St. Cloud tell me that she was in Portugal with her girlfriend, and her friend fell and broke her hip. And overnight, her friend amassed a hospital bill of $35,000, and they wouldn't give her the passport back to come back to the United States to get the care that she needed here until they paid off the $35,000. Luckily for the lady who broke her hip, her friend was very generous and had a credit card that she could put the $35,000 on to pay for that. But had she not been in that situation, she would have been trapped in Portugal until her family could find some way to raise $35,000. Now, you might also use this in the United States if you're on a tour group and you know you're traveling with traveler checks or something like that. But anytime that you're traveling and you need that extra cash advance, if you're a lifetime member, we can help you with up to $50,000 to get you out of trouble in those circumstances. We'll also provide you with a translation service. What if you don't understand the bill because it's in a foreign language, or you can't understand what they're trying to tell you you need to do for medical treatment? Well, then we can handle getting you a translator so that that person can help you understand exactly what you need to know in order to get the medical treatment that you require and understand the billing. And then lastly, we offer Emergency Message Center to our lifetime members. Now, Emergency Message Center can actually be used even in a non-medical emergency. Let's say you're evacuating a hurricane and you tell your kids that you're going to hole up at the Hyatt Regency in Orlando, and then because traffic happened or there was an accident on the road or there was a detour due to flooding or something, you ended up taking a different route and ending up at a completely different hotel. And because oftentimes during times of storm emergencies, our cell phones don't work, if you can't get on your cell phone to contact each of your children to let them know where you are, if you can call MASA on the landline, we can call all of your business associates, all your family, all your friends, whoever you've listed, and we can let them know that you're safe and sound and what your plan changes have been. You could maybe also use this if you were on a cruise and the cruise had to go around a storm and now you are going to be late arriving in port. Just make one call from the ship to shore. We'll call everybody else. So I thought it was important to put this at the beginning of the presentation so you would know what these benefits actually are. So now I'm going to share with you an article that appeared in the Washington Post, and it was written by Melissa Bailey on November 17th of 2017. And her article starts like this. One patient was charged $3,660 for a 4-mile ride to the hospital. A second patient was charged $8,460 to be transferred from a hospital that could not handle his case to another that could. A third found herself marooned at an out-of-network hospital where she'd been taken without her consent, and her insurance didn't cover her there, so she didn't want to stay there because she was going to end up with a big bill. So one thing that people typically say is, I've been to the hospital 5 times. I've never called an ambulance. I've always just had my wife or my daughter or my neighbor take me. Well, under normal circumstances, what's wrong with that? Think about it. If you're taking a private vehicle to the hospital, then, you get stopped at every stoplight all the way to town, all the way to the hospital. That can delay your care for a substantial amount of time, depending on how you hit the lights. Also, you can't go around an accident. If the person who's driving you is somebody who loves you, and you truly are having a medical emergency, and you start to crash during that trip, then they have a decision to make, don't they? They have to decide if they are going to be a distracted driver, and that's worse than texting and driving, believe me, or are they going to pull their car over to the side of the road, and are they going to call 911, which now delays your care, because if they'd have just called 911 and picked you up at home, you would already be receiving medical treatment by that point. So under normal circumstances, that's what I tell people. But we're not under normal circumstances right now. We're under a stupid virus that's affecting the whole world. So if you were having a medical emergency now at home, or thought you might be, but you weren't sure, and you didn't have the capability of driving because maybe your spouse is an essential employee somewhere in an essential business and they can still work, but you've been home by yourself, then you pick up the phone to call your neighbor. We're under curfew. So if it's curfew times, what's going to happen then? You expect them to break curfew to drive you to the hospital? And also, they may not want to risk exposing you to the virus if they've been to town, and they wonder maybe if they've been exposed. And they might be afraid that you've been exposed and they don't want to catch it from you. So this is a whole new set of problems now that we never had before. And so another thing that I want to say is most 911 calls are not actually made by the patient. They're made by a family member, a friend, the police, or a bystander. And in most emergencies, you may not even be in the position to have a say in that call being made. What if you're in a car accident? The police are going to call, or a bystander will. What if you're in a grocery store and you slip and fall? The people in the grocery store are going to call 911. So, the place you should be, the way you should get to the hospital in any medical emergency is by ambulance. And you are vulnerable to getting a balance bill when you call 911 or get into an ambulance. And that's something I was seeing on a day-to-day basis in my senior advocacy. MASA solves that problem immediately once you become a member. So one person that was a part of her story was Devin Hall. And the reason I want to talk about him is because he has what I used to consider to be the best medical insurance that a senior can have, and that's a federal health retirement plan. And what happened to Devin Hall is that on December, let me see, it says in this article, on December 27th of 2016, he was taken to a local hospital for rectal bleeding, and that hospital, unfortunately, didn't have the right specialist to treat him for what was wrong. So they looked at his insurance and the other nearby hospitals, and they found one that was in network for his insurance and had the proper level of trauma care to be able to take care of him for what was going on. So they were going to send him there, and they did so. But the one place they didn't check to make sure was in network for his insurance was the ambulance. And so he took a 20-mile ambulance ride. And when he got that bill after everything was said and done, he was stunned to see that the total cost of that bill was $8,460 for a 20-mile ride. And when he realized that his federal health insurance plan only was going to agree to pay $1,350.30, and they were going to still hold him responsible for $727.08, his initial understanding was that the rest of that bill was going to go away. And man, he was thankful that he was only going to be responsible for $727.08. But when he really started to read that explanation of benefits, what it showed was that the reason his insurance was only paying $1,350.30 was because the ambulance services charges actually exceeded the plan's Medicare-based fee schedule. Yes, that's what I said. So even though it was a federal health plan, and most people perceive those as not being Medicare plans, once you reach the age of 65, it doesn't matter if you have a federal health plan, a TRICARE for Life plan, a Medicare Advantage plan, or a Medicare supplement plan, they all follow the Medicare rate fee schedule for what they're going to pay, number one, and they also follow the guidelines of medical necessity that are set forth by Medicare to determine whether or not that ambulance ride, that x-ray, that lab test, that outpatient procedure was actually medically necessary or not. So when he realized that he was going to be responsible for the full balance of $71,0970, he decided to do what a lot of senior clients I've come in contact with over the years have done, and I like to nickname that the $5 protest. They will believe often that as long as they're paying something toward that bill, that can't get turned over to a collection agency. But today, that's just not true. And so when American Medical Response turned his case over to a debt collector, he realized his credit was going to be affected by this ambulance bill. So what he ended up deciding to do is go ahead and file an appeal, still believing that once they heard the facts in his case, he would win that appeal. Well, unfortunately, it was proven by American Medical Response that the charges were warranted, because since the person taking care of him in that ambulance on that 20-mile trip from one hospital to the other was a paramedic instead of an EMT, they could legally call that a critical care transport, even though they weren't providing him with actual critical care. They could charge for it as if it were critical care, and that left him responsible to pay the remaining balance. So the reality check from this article that I got was, if you are somebody that's originally from the North, Ohio, New Jersey, New York, you may remember that about 40 years ago, most ambulance rides were free, especially if you took them between the hours of 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. Those were the hours when they were free. If you took them from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m., however, there was a fee for those ambulances. And guess what we did as a people? We figured that out. And there were some people who, when they were truly having a major medical emergency, they just weren't sure yet. They were within an hour or two of getting a free ambulance. They were afraid of getting a bill, so they delayed their care. And sometimes those people did not have the positive outcome they would have had they called 911 immediately. So the government decided that we weren't smart enough to make these decisions on our own, and they stopped funding these free ambulance programs. And so now ambulances today are increasingly run by private companies and venture capital firms. And today what this means for you is that they can go ahead and they can be aggressive billers, because the ambulance companies reached out to the government when people stopped, when people started doing that $5 protest and they weren't getting enough money to operate their ambulance services, because not only were the people paying small amounts, but now Medicare, TRICARE, federal health plans, and Medicare Advantage plans were also paying much smaller amounts toward these bills. They said they couldn't stay in business. So the government, instead of bailing them out, let them bring in private companies and venture capital firms to fund these ambulance companies. And now those same companies go after you aggressively to collect those balance bills. So ambulance operators also charge by the mile and by the services provided during the ride, such as oxygen. If the ambulance is staffed by paramedics rather than EMTs, that will automatically result in a higher charge. even if you're like Devin and you didn't need paramedic level services in the first place. Ambulance companies and private insurers often cannot agree on a fair price for that ride. So therefore, the ambulance service, in order to operate within the 911 network in America, does not have to join an ambulance network with any insurance company at all. So that means your chances of actually getting an in-network ambulance are about the same as, if you're familiar with The Price is Right, put the Plinko chip in the top of the board and hope that it gets to the in-network slot at the bottom that you're seeking and not an out-of-network slot. Because it's not like us as a people are going to run to the end of our driveway when the paramedics arrive and say, stop, let's just make sure you're in network before I let you save my husband. You're not going to do that. You're going to be the person like me that goes, hey, this is where you need to go. You're going to be out there to meet that ambulance to make sure they quickly get to your home to save your loved one. And that's what you should do. You shouldn't be worrying about what the cost of that bill is going to be. But this ends up causing patients to get caught in a system in which ambulance services can legally charge thousands of dollars for a single trip, even when that trip starts at an in-network hospital. So you may be thinking to yourself, well, why is this happening now? Well, the reason this is happening now is because in 2010, the Affordable Care Act was passed. And while I thought, at that time, I thought it was a good idea, frankly. But the problem was, what I didn't realize, and nobody else did either, was they didn't have the government funding to operate the Affordable Care Act plans. So initially, the plan was to take the money from the Social Security Trust Fund. But they had already robbed from Peter to pay Paul too many times by then. And so what they ended up doing, very sneakily, mind you, was they took $716 billion from the Medicare Trust Fund to operate the Affordable Care Act plans. Now, the next question I have for you is, would you like to guess what the age cutoff is if you're not on Medicaid to receive an Affordable Care Act plan? If you guess 65, you are correct. So in essence, think about this. They took the money from seniors to pay for the health care for everybody in the country, but they did not allow the people they stole that money from to even have access to those health care programs. And when they did that, there was not some big pile of $716 billion available to be able to use immediately to fund these programs. So they decided they were going to have to take that money out one hunk at a time between the years of 2013 and 2022. So guess what? We're not even completely done robbing the money out yet. So, but what they did do is they had to cut the benefits that were already available to seniors when they did this. And so I went to the Congressional Budget Office and I got the actual numbers of the amounts they cut from each section of Medicare. And as I'm going over these, this might light up some stuff in your mind as to why you're being charged extra for things that fall into these categories that you weren't used to being charged for before. So I'm going to go right down the list. They cut hospital services by $260 billion, payment rates in Medicare Advantage plans by $156 billion. They cut DSH payments and other Medicare provisions by $145 billion. They cut home health services benefits by $66 billion. Now this one's hitting home for me because my family took in an elderly neighbor that has dementia. And as soon as we did that, the doctor that he had as a primary care wrote a prescription for a home health care aide to come into our home and give him a shower 3 days a week. But when we attempted to use that prescription, we found out that because of the cuts to Medicare, they decided that they're not going to cover home health care services for folks on Medicare Advantage plans unless they've had a hospital stay in the previous 2 weeks. And then they will only cover the cost of that for a 2-week period, and then you're on your own again. So we're not getting that help with our neighbor that we would love to have because of the changes they made to Medicare due to the Affordable Care Act. So they cut skilled nursing services by $39 billion. They cut hospice services by $17 billion, and where medical transportation falls is the all other services category, and that one was cut by $33 billion. Now, why I say they did this sneaky is because, first of all, they claim that that $33 billion cut they did that one first because they felt that was the one that seniors would use least. Well, get serious, people. What happens to our health as we get older? It doesn't get better, it declines. So why would they assume then that ambulance service would be the one place that seniors would use the least? It was just an excuse. Furthermore, every year in just before January, everybody gets, that's on Social Security, a letter stating what your cost of living for the increase, for the year is, what your cost of living increase for the year is, right? But a couple weeks later, you get a second letter that actually shows that your Part B premiums went up. So the first one, two years ago, was an increase of 2.8%. And this year was the increase of 1.6%, but both of those letters were followed with the letter that said the Part B premiums went up. So depending on where you live in the United States, you either took a loss in the increase of your income or a wash in the increase of your income, but you didn't really get a true increase in your income. But what this proved to me was, guess what? The government knows how to put a stamp on an envelope and mail that letter to you when they want you to know the information. So I'm going to tell you in just a couple slides what they did instead when they wanted to notify people that they made changes to the Medicare coverage of ambulance services. So the first thing that they did to change this system was they changed the definition of medical necessity that you're under if you're 65 or older now, to match the definition of medical necessity that the rest of us have always been under. And it reads like this: medical necessity is established when the patient's condition is such that use of any other method of transportation is counterindicated. So in any case in which some means of transportation other than an ambulance could be used without endangering the individual's health, and here's the kicker, whether or not such other transportation is actually available to you, no payment may be made for ambulance services. So if you're at home by yourself because your spouse is an essential worker and you're not, and you're having a medical emergency and you can't get a hold of anybody to take you because they don't want to risk getting coronavirus or giving you coronavirus, then if you get to the hospital and find out that it was just gas because you ate a Mexican meal last night that you shouldn't have eaten, or you ate Italian and that always gives you gas and you thought you were having a heart attack, and they resolve that gas issue and send you home, it doesn't matter current circumstances or not, your insurance is not going to cover the cost of that medical transportation. It's not their problem that you couldn't find any other means. They tell you that right in the definition. So they also tell you that Medicare may only cover ambulance services to the nearest appropriate medical facility that's able to give you the care you need. So if you choose to be transported to a facility farther away than the closest one they could take you to, because that's the one you've been to in the past, or that's the one you know your doctor practices at, and that's where you want to go because you don't want to start out at one place and be transported to another, well, just understand that if it does indeed be declared by your insurance as, yes, it was a medical necessity, they're still only allowed to pay the miles to the nearest facility. The person who's going to be out of pocket for the rest of those miles is the patient, because the rules state that all Medicare Advantage plans, all Medicare supplement plans, TRICARE plans, and federal health plans, once you're 65, they're all plans that are provided by private companies, but they are approved by Medicare. So if Medicare would approve a claim or service of yours as being medically necessary, then by law, your insurance has to cover their portion of that bill. But if Medicare determines that was not medically necessary, and I'm sure you've already discovered this with some other services you received, Medicare will not allow your insurance then to cover any portion of that bill. So you get stuck with the entire amount, and you may have a big financial catastrophe that is on top of the physical health catastrophe that you've just gotten done healing up from. So how did they notify everybody in America that they made these changes then? Well, this is what I call sneaky. They placed this document called Medicare Coverage of Ambulance Services that should be on your screen now, originally at the Department of Health and Human Services website as a downloadable only PDF document. Now it's located on Medicare.gov as a downloadable only PDF document. What's wrong with this? Well, I contacted the department and I said, you guys, what about the seniors who only use the internet on their phone? Or they have a computer at home, but they don't want to bother buying ink. It's expensive. They have a limited budget. They don't have a printer. Well, they said, that's unfortunate, but they can still access their local libraries and get that information. Well, not right now, you can't. And anyways, if you did, you would still have to pay to have those copies printed. So I said, why don't you go ahead and just send me a case of those and I'll be in charge of handing them out. And they said, no, have you never heard of the Paperwork Reduction Act? We're not printing that document. You must download it and print it yourself if you want access, or read it online. It works online too. So I'm going to go over the very important page 5 in this document. And if you've printed out your client packet, this is going to be page 2 of your client packet. I've already kind of gone over some of this with you, but I'm going to quickly go over it again. It tells you at the top of page 5 that Medicare Part B covers ambulance services to or from a hospital, a critical access hospital, or a skilled nursing facility. It tells you that Medicare covers and helps pay for ambulance services only when other transportation could endanger your health. Then they go on to remind you about what I just said about only covering the ambulance service to the nearest appropriate medical facility. And if you're the one that makes the choice to be transported to a facility closer to home or to the doctor of your choice, then you're going to have to pay the balance of those miles. And at the bottom, they remind you that these are some examples of when Medicare might cover emergency ambulance transportation. If when the paramedics arrive, you happen to be in shock, unconscious, or bleeding heavily, or you need skilled medical treatment during that transport, they might cover your emergency ambulance transport. But you notice at the bottom there, they say, remember, these are only examples. Medicare coverage depends on the seriousness of your medical condition and whether or not you could have been safely transported by other means. Well, let me just talk about this a second. You notice that line that says in shock, unconscious, or bleeding heavily? I had a client in St. Cloud. Well, she's now a MASA member. She wasn't when her incident occurred, but she was taking her city trash can out to the end of her driveway. And when she got to the end of the driveway, the trash can kind of went over a little dip or hill, and it went backwards. And because she hadn't had the lid closed and she was holding it in the hinge area, that trash can, when it fell backwards, first of all, she smacked her face on the pavement, her glasses went flying, and she had a bloody nose and scrapes on her face. So she crawled on her hands and knees into her home and called her neighbor to ask her neighbor to come pick her up, to come help her get cleaned up and get her glasses out of the driveway. Well, when the neighbor walked in, she gasped and she said, "Why didn't you call 911? And she said, "What are you talking about? I just have, a bloody nose, some scrapes and contusions. I don't need an ambulance." And the neighbor said, "Well, have you looked at your hand?" Well, up until that point, she hadn't. What she did not realize and didn't even feel, if you believe it or not, up to that point was when the lid on the trash can closed, it actually severed her finger partially. So her finger was just hanging there, and she was bleeding profusely. So they called 911, and she took approximately a 4-mile ride to the hospital. And they stitched her up, and within 10 hours, she was back home. And when she started to go through her bills from that process, her expensive Medicare supplement had paid for her emergency room stay just fine, except for her copayment. But what was not covered was the entire ambulance bill. Because according to Medicare, she could have gone by other means and had the same outcome. So they determined that she should have had a neighbor, a friend, a relative, somebody else drive her to the hospital, and therefore that bill wasn't covered. So she was actually on the hook for an $800 balance bill. And during that seminar in her mobile home park, she stood up and told that story to her neighbors and said, I'm going to buy a MASA plan. I don't ever want this to happen to me again. And I hope that you guys see the value in this as well. So, you know, I share these stories with you because they are things that actually happen to clients. And so they think it's important. So I also think it's important. So on the next page is, first of all, on the right-hand side, this is what an explanation of benefits looks like if you just have a Medicare without a supplement, without an Advantage plan, and so forth. If you do have an insurance, this form is going to be very similar to this one. It's going to have the same information fields, but it might be turned landscape instead of portrait, and it's going to have the logo of your insurance company on it. But the information contained on an explanation of benefits is very important, and I want you to understand what it means. So the first column on every explanation of benefits is going to have either a yes or a no. And that yes or no means, was it a claim or service that Medicare deemed to be medically necessary or not? The next column over tells you the amount the provider charged for the service that you actually received. Going over to the next column, we have what the amount was on the Medicare fee schedule that Medicare would approve as a proper amount to pay for that service. The next column over is the amount that the insurance actually paid out. And so if Medicare approved it, if the answer was yes, and Medicare approved a certain amount and you had a supplement, they may have kicked in and paid a little bit more, but you may still have an amount in that last box that means what you may be billed. Now, that's a shock to most people. And also, most people will receive more than one explanation of benefits. If you think back to Devin, his first explanation of benefits said that he would be billed $700 and something, and what he ended up being billed in the end was over $7,000. So you may get more than one explanation of benefits. So that's how you read your explanation of benefits when you get that. And when I do medical billing mediation for my, my senior advocacy clients, that's the first document that I want to see before I start calling people, because if in that first column it says no, because of the changes to the guidelines for medical necessity, you often don't have any leg to stand on for a medical transportation bill anymore. You just simply have to pay it. But if you happen to be like Constance, her story's on the left of your screen, she was a MASA member already when she had her medical emergency. And in her case, her neighbor found her unconscious in the driveway one day, and her neighbor did what any good neighbor would do, which was picked up the phone and called 911. And unfortunately for Constance, by the time the paramedics arrived, she was no longer unconscious. Now, they had no idea how long she had laid there unconscious, number one. So the first thing they did was they took her blood pressure and they listened to her heart rate. And while they were slow, they were not really abnormally slow for the circumstances. But what was alarming to the paramedics was she was very weak. She couldn't stand up and walk around. She didn't have the strength to pick her own self up. So they knew that her neighbor, who was in her 80s, would not be able to lift up Constance and carry her to the car and load her in and then drive her to the emergency room, go in, get a wheelchair, come out and get her, take her in there and sign her in, and then they would sit there and do what? Wait, because she wasn't complaining of chest pain. So instead, the paramedics said, you know what, let's just take you to the hospital and let us get you there quickly so they can look at what's going on. So when she arrived at the emergency room, they were pretty busy, but they did, on the advice of the paramedics, go ahead and take a quick blood draw immediately. And they sent that to the lab on a stat order. And when that lab order and the results came back, it showed that she was suffering from sepsis and septic arthritis. And that they immediately called in a surgeon after they looked at her body. They determined she was about ready to lose her arms and her feet. Can you imagine? So she was a 10-day inpatient in that hospital and 10 days in rehab, but when she got home with both of her arms and her feet. So that was a fabulous outcome. And so she was stunned to get the bill for $1,837 for the ambulance ride when her insurance had paid for everything else. Well, because she was a MASA member, she had the peace of mind of being able to fold that bill in half, put it in an envelope and mail it into MASA. She could simply, if she was tech savvy, snapped a picture of it and emailed it to us, but she snail mailed it. And when we got it, our attorneys, we have a floor of attorneys who actually fight these bills on the behalf of our clients. And so the attorneys contacted Constance's doctors, and the doctors came up with a very good defense. And they thought this would be ironclad, and so did our attorneys. And we thought we could force Medicare to pay this bill and her insurance to pay this bill, because the argument they made was what I said a few minutes ago. Had she gone by private car, she wasn't complaining of chest pain. She wasn't having a hard time breathing. So by the time that she got back there to the emergency department back in the back, and she was actually seen by a doctor, and then they ordered blood work, and then they waited for it to come back, it would have been too late to save her arms and her feet. So the only way she came home with a good outcome really was because she took an ambulance. So we wrote that up and sent it into Medicare and went before the appeals board, not once, but 4 separate times. And all 4 times they declined to pay the bill. So to Constance's relief, MASA paid that entire bill, and she was not responsible to pay that cost out of pocket. So that's why it's so important to me that everybody at least hear that there is an option to purchase a MASA plan to protect yourself, because we can't prevent this from happening, but we can protect ourselves if it does. So these 4 bills on this page, I'm not going to tell the story of, but I'm just going to point something out. If you notice in the upper left, that bill says the insurance this person had was a Blue Cross supplement. Now their ambulance ride was $49.67.90. And since Medicare paid 0, Blue Cross also paid 0. On the bottom, this was not a traditional insurance. This was TRICARE for life. I cannot tell you how many times in my restaurant seminars a veteran has said to me, I don't need MASA. TRICARE pays for everything. Well, guess what, guys? Once you're 65 years old, they don't. They don't cover medical transportation that they consider that you wasted because you could have gone to the hospital by other means and had the same outcome. They word it a little differently, but they stick to it because they're forced to follow the Medicare guidelines of medical necessity and the Medicare fee schedule for payment. So you can, if you're a veteran, end up with a very expensive ambulance bill just like everybody else. And over here on the right-hand side of the screen, these are bills that their insurance companies did not have a problem admitting were medically necessary. The problem for these 2 patients, and thankfully MASA clients, all 4 of these people were MASA clients, is that the ambulances that they got into were out of network for their particular insurance. And when that happens, it means the insurance company only pays the amount on the Medicare fee schedule, which is considered to be the Medicare approved amount. So in the first bill, the cost of that transport was $1,718, but the insurance was only required to pay $374.40, which left them with a balance bill of $1,343.60. The one that's on the far right, that person went 9 miles. The cost of the ride was $1,484.21. Their insurance paid $464.51, which left them to be responsible for the balance bill of $1,019.70. In all 4 cases, MASA either paid the entire amount, or we came in and we paid what was left after the insurance company paid the portion that they felt they were responsible for. So how much does Medicare actually pay then? Well, most emergency medical transportation is considered to be out of network, because I'm going to give you the example of the state of Florida if you're listening here. In the state of Florida, when those ambulance companies complained that they couldn't afford to operate anymore, and the out-of-network providers came into the network, and it was venture capital companies that were providing the funding for these, and private investors. What actually occurred is the state of Florida did something like all states did, which was called an amended trauma service area assessment. And in that assessment, they looked at the number of seniors every year who are taken by emergency transportation to the nearest level 1 trauma center. And they looked at the number of ground ambulances in that area who were actually in network for any insurance company at all, let alone yours. So I can't go over all of those statistics with you on the webinar like I would in the restaurant, because in the restaurant I pick that particular area's statistics and I go over them with that group of people. So on our follow-up call, if you're curious about the statistics for your particular area, whether that be Florida or another state, I can give that to you. But in general, Florida was broken up into 19 trauma service areas. And in the state of Florida, we only have 8 level 1 trauma centers that we share. So as you can imagine, if there's 19 trauma service areas and there's only 8 level 1 trauma centers here, we often have to travel a significant distance to be getting to our level 1 trauma center, often 60 to 70 miles, in fact. So now you might begin to understand why those trips are so very expensive. And you may be beginning to understand why you may take a medical air flight if you have to take that trip of 60 or 70 miles, because that's the only way you're going to be able to get there in a hurry. So in the state of Florida, most trauma service areas have 1.4 ground ambulances for every 10,000 people that are in network with any insurance company at all. The rest are all out of network. So when a service is out of network for your insurance only pays the usual, customary, and reasonable rate. In addition to that, the amount paid for a medical service in a geographical area is also based on your zip code. So if you happen to be living in a rural area, or you share a rural zip code, even though you live closer to town, then you're going to automatically pay more for that bill just because you live at in a rural zip code. So then a balance bill is normally generated after someone uses ground or air transportation. Who is it that gets that bill? If you've said the patient, you are absolutely correct, which leaves you exposed. So the bill on the screen right now is an actual air ambulance bill that MASA paid. And before I get into that, I want to ask you to guess what division of the U.S. government actually oversees air ambulances here in the United States. Sometimes people will say, well, I don't know, maybe it's the Department of Health and Human Services, because that would seem like a good guess for a medical air transport, wouldn't it? But the actual division of the U.S. government that oversees air ambulances in the United States is in fact the FAA. Why? Because in 1978, there was a bill passed called the Airline Deregulation Act of 1978. And what that act did was effectively remove U.S. federal government control from fares, routes, and more, allowing the commercial airliners to charge whatever they wanted for the flights that people were taking. And what the politicians today claim they didn't realize was that medical air ambulances were tacked onto that bill as an amendment, and that meant that medical air flight companies could literally charge you whatever they want to charge you for the flight. So that means that they can just pull any amount of money out of the air that they feel like charging you for that flight without rhyme or reason, because they can never be charged of taking advantage of a senior or a younger person or price gouging. They're allowed to charge what they want. So I know you can read the one that's on the screen, but the one I'm going to tell you about is one of the ones that we paid more recently, and it is the one that is in your packet if you've printed out your packet. And that is one that is a lady who lives in St. Louis, Missouri. And in St. Louis, Missouri, a woman was taken to the hospital, or she went on her own to her local hospital because she'd fallen at home and she'd hurt her neck and had gotten very swollen. And because of this, They took x-rays and MRIs, and they realized that she was getting some swelling in her brain, and that if that swelling didn't go down soon, she was going to need surgery to relieve that. And at that level 3 hospital where she went in town, which is our typical local hospital, they couldn't perform that surgery on her. She needed to be transported to the nearest level 1. Well, that nearest level 1 for her was just a few blocks away on the other side of town. So immediately, the local doctors at the smaller hospital sent the MRI results to the trauma surgeon at the other hospital for review to see if that doctor agreed with their diagnosis at the first hospital. And they did. But their recommendation was, let's not wait a few hours and see what happens. Let's have her here where we can do immediate surgery on her the moment she needs it, so there won't be any lapse in her care. So they decided to have the hospital helicopter for the trauma hospital come to the other hospital and pick her up. But in the meantime, while they were making all these arrangements, a storm started brewing outside that was very windy and rainy, and their small little helicopter wasn't capable of flying in those conditions. But instead of changing their mind and sending her by ground ambulance anyway, because they didn't want her jostled around if they hit a pothole or something, they called a bigger company called Survival Flight that had large helicopters like the Coast Guard has that can fly under much more windy conditions. And that helicopter moved her from hospital A to hospital B. But when she got to the trauma center, they gave her some medication that reduced the swelling immediately, and she didn't actually end up needing that surgery that they thought she was going to need. So in the end, when the bill was turned into Medicare, what do you think Medicare said? Yep, they said that trip hadn't been medically necessary, and it was the patient who was responsible for the $68,000 bill that she got. So the reason I chose that bill to go over with you is because the bill that I got many years ago was $33,000. The one that's on the screen for you was $63,000. And the one that we recently paid was $68,000. So I ask, what's happening to the cost of medical air flights today? Are they getting cheaper? Nope. They're getting more expensive because there's no rules that tell these people they can't charge these fees. So Constance was very relieved when she received a call from the president of MASA letting her know, because she had been concerned and contacted us wondering if she was going to have to sell her house to pay these bills, that we were going to cover the cost of that medical air flight, and she wasn't going to ever have to worry about that again. And so she was relieved that she was a MASA member and didn't have to be responsible to pay that bill. So how much then does Medicare actually pay for a medical helicopter transport? Well, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services say it pays an average of $4,624 per ride, plus a $31.67 per mile fuel surcharge, which works out to an average Medicare reimbursement of $6,556 for helicopter ambulance rides for seniors. Medicaid in most states actually pays less. So that's really a drop in the bucket to what it will cost, and it's really unfair. And that's why the lady in Solivita got a bill, one of our clients got a bill for $63,000 or around that number for a balance bill for a medical air flight that her husband took before she was a MASA member, and then got a lien on her home because they couldn't pay the balance off in 12 months, which is what the rules are. So simply becoming a MASA member at any level will protect you from getting these bills and give you the peace of mind of never worrying about it. So what are the facts? Well, the further you live away from a hospital that provides major trauma care, the more expensive those transportation costs will be. The average cost nationally for a ground ambulance is $1,214, and the average cost nationally for an air ambulance is $50,200. And so what I want to go over with you now are the trauma levels that all medical facilities have and why you might be sent to a level 1 trauma center as a senior versus being treated at your local smaller level hospital. So in the United States, we actually have 5 levels of trauma. And I know if you're looking at that string going, that one at the bottom is not 5, it's 4. She doesn't understand Roman numerals. No, I only put 4 on there because level 5 is the quick care walk-in clinic that you would have at CentraCare or the Minute Clinic at Walgreens. A level 4 is actually a hospital that doesn't have a 24-hour emergency room. They're really just kind of a satellite hospital that can stabilize you and transport you on to the next higher level of care, which is a level 3. Now, most of our local small hospitals, like in Florida, where I live in St. Cloud Regional, you will have Florida Hospital in Kissimmee, which I think is now called Advent, several outshoots of ORMC in Orlando that aren't the actual ORMC facility are level 3s. Those facilities can do general procedures on you. They can put in a heart stent sometimes. They can do an appendix surgery or an absolutely emergency surgery to stabilize you and then transport you to a higher level of care. They treat the flu. They treat other illnesses that are lengthy that you're going to be in the hospital for. But they don't do those intricate and delicate surgeries. For those, you either have to be at a level 2 or a level 1. They are very similar, but the difference between the two is that at a level 2 medical center, the main specialist doctors, the surgeons that are the high-level surgeons, they don't actually work for the hospital. They are subcontractor doctors. That means that the hospital cannot regulate their time as closely as they would an employee doctor. So if they're on call, they're actually permitted to be up to 1 hour away from that facility. Well, what does that mean for your health care? It means that you're often going to arrive in an emergency situation at that facility an hour, up to an hour before your doctor does. Now that means that you're going to be initially cared for by a resident or a general practitioner doctor. And that also means that they don't, what's the word I want to look for? They don't attract all specialists and subspecialists to that facility. It's their choice if they want to subcontract with that hospital or not. And so they are kind of loosely controlled. But at a level 1 trauma center, even the definition is different. It is defined as a comprehensive regional resource that is a tertiary care facility central to the trauma system. At a level 1 hospital, then all the doctors, including the high-level specialists, the trauma nurses, even down to the surgical techs, they are employees of that hospital. And when they are on call, every single member of that team has the stipulation that they can be no further from that facility than 20 minutes when they're on call. Now you have a serious increase in the quality of your care and the speed at which you will have that life-saving procedure if you indeed need it. So all level 1 hospitals can treat you for any level of sickness or trauma that you have, and they don't have to then stabilize you and transport you somewhere else, which automatically increases the positive outcome that you would have and makes it a more positive outcome. So those are the facts. Why then might you as a senior be transported from your local level 3 or even your local level 2 if you happen to have one to the nearest level 1? Well, it's because if you're under the age of 5 or over the age of 55 and you meet a certain set of criteria that all doctors, hospitals, and paramedics have agreed to follow, and you're in your golden hour, they have to send you on to the next higher level of care, just like your doctor's office does. Think about this. 50 years ago, your primary care physician treated you for whatever was wrong. But today, when you go to your primary care doctor, what do? If your lab work's wrong or you've had some tests come back abnormal, they send you to a specialist, right? Well, that's not because your primary care is not capable of treating you for that. In fact, they're much more educated today than they were 50 years ago. But the reason is that their insurance will only cover them to deal with a certain level of care for you. Doctors are graded based on the outcomes of their patients. That's how they're allowed to accept insurance companies. That's how they're allowed to operate at a hospital. So, and it's not really a bad thing for you. But so now let me go over for you those guidelines. If you're under the age of 5 and you're over the age of 55 and your systolic blood pressure is less than 90, your respiratory rate is less than 10 or greater than 29, you have a certain type of pelvic fracture, you break 2 or more long bones, you have paralysis as part of what's going on with you, you have a previous history of cardiac or respiratory disease, you are an insulin-dependent diabetic, you have cirrhosis of the liver or are morbidly obese, you're over 55 and pregnant, you are in an immunocompromised state, maybe you take prednisone for a lung problem, for instance, maybe you take anticoagulants like warfarin or one of the other ones, and you have a bleeding disorder. Those are all the reasons, when combined with their suspicion that you are in your golden hour, which is the hour immediately following the onset of a serious health condition or traumatic injury, in which speedy intervention to increase your chances of survival and improve your outcome are the greatest, they have to send you to the nearest level 1 trauma center. And for those of you who are listening in the Orlando, the Kissimmee, the St. Cloud, the Groveland area, for all of us over in Brevard County as well, the nearest level 1 trauma center to all of us, that's ORMC in Orlando, you guys. So just imagine, do the math, get out your Google Maps and figure out how far are you from ORMC in Orlando. And then imagine how long it would take to get you there by ground ambulance, and you will begin to understand why so many seniors today are getting loaded into helicopters and they're taking flights to their nearest level 1 trauma center. It's to save your life, and it's one of the best decisions they ever made. It's just that it's an expense when they do that. So what is the reality then? Well, if you're a senior who has who's living paycheck to paycheck, if you get one of these expensive ground ambulance bills, or God forbid a medical air flight, then bankruptcy could be a reality. Because if you're not able to go get a loan like I did when I was younger, or sell a home or a motor home if you have one, or go and borrow money from a child, since you have to pay the medical transportation bills within 12 months, or they start attaching your property, you might decide to declare bankruptcy to keep them from doing that. And medical bills statistics say bankruptcies resulting from medical bills will affect nearly 2 million people this year, making healthcare the #1 cause of such filings and outpacing bankruptcies due to credit card bills or unpaid mortgages. This is a sad state of affairs we're in, you guys. Something that started out to be a good thing has really turned out to not be so good for seniors. If you're a senior who's not living paycheck to paycheck, then the reality for you may just be that this is the largest depleter of IRAs and retirement account monies in the United States. You may be in the position to be able to sell an RV, an extra vehicle, borrow money from a bank, or get money from a child, or liquidate some other assets in some way and pay it. But the reality is, it doesn't matter who you are, it really stinks, doesn't it? So the solution to the problem is MASA. MASA is a division of Medical Air Services Association known as MASA Global, and as such, that helps us to be very financially secure. We actually have 3 divisions. The one I'm presenting to you today is Medical Transport Solutions, and that division is what this company would be called if you purchase this plan in the United States or Canada. If you purchase this plan in the Bahamas or Mexico or the Caribbean, for instance, it would be called MASA Assist. And if you have a funeral or cremation plan with any of the over 2,000 funeral homes and crematories across the United States that's owned by SCI or Dignity Memorial, such as any funeral home with that insignia, or Neptune or National Cremation Societies, for example, and you bought the transportation and relocation solutions protection part of that would cremate you where you were away from home and fly your ashes back, or in the event of a burial situation, fly your body back home, then you may have a smaller version of a MASA plan that you purchase through your funeral home. Those funeral homes and crematories purchase those plans from MASA. So if you think about it, we're a very, very large financially secure company. And we have 1.9 million active members just in the United States alone. We have an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau, and we are partnered with major groups and organizations, including the Air Force Association, the National College of Surgeons, Neptune and National Cremation Societies, as I've mentioned earlier, even teachers unions, hospitals, and EMTs and other medical professionals make up a large portion of our membership, including those people who are members who are under the age of 55 and 60, because people of all ages need this plan. And the people who send you on those rides are especially cognizant of this fact. And so that's why they make up a large portion of our younger membership. So will you ever need MASA? Actually, I actually get people that say, I'm still not sure. Do I really need MASA? Well, statistically speaking, if you're somebody who needs statistics, there is one EMS call for every 10 people any given year nationally. What happens to your health the older you get? Yes, it declines. We are not marked from an arc, and we do not reverse age into an egg. Where do 90% of all medical emergencies occur? Yeah, they don't always occur when you're away from home. They occur within 5 miles of home. I bet your mom told you that when you were younger. My mom did. And just so you know, there are over 550,000 air ambulance transports each year, with 54% of those being inter-facility transfers. So going on statistics, one of my coworkers did some calculations. And if you are a couple that is 65 years or older, married or not, and in the next 10 years, there is actually a 1 in 28 chance that you will be taking, one or the other of you will take a medical air flight to a level 1 trauma center because of a health emergency due to the changes in the guidelines for when they should transport you and why. So you do have a chance that this could happen to you. Don't feel too safe. So what we guarantee is, as a condition of membership, we are never going to ask a health question because we don't have any underwriting. We're technically not in insurance. We're under the insurance umbrella just in Florida because that affords you financial protection. We put your money in a trust account here. But all across the country, we have we put our money in an account, and we have a reserve of up to 150%, I'm sorry, more than we would need if every MASA member made a claim at the same time. We also have a secondary insurance policy with a company called Iron Shore Specialty Insurance, and that is called a stop loss policy. So we are backed up just like the FDIC. We have no age limits. We have no claim forms. We just require you to send us the bill you receive within 180 days of receiving it. That way we can get it paid in a timely manner that does not affect your credit. We have no deductibles. In fact, if your insurance has a deductible and they determine it medically necessary, but you still have to pay a deductible, we'll pay your deductible. We'll let them pay their portion. And if there's anything still left at the end, we'll come in and we'll pay that too. We have no network limitations because, as I said earlier, we want any emergency personnel to be able to rescue you without you first having to ask us permission. And we have no dollar limits on emergency transport costs because the government has not put a limit on what emergency transport companies can charge you. So we're not going to do that to you either. We offer worldwide coverage, and my very favorite benefit of all is even pre-existing medical conditions are covered from day one for emergency transportation services. So even if you took an ambulance yesterday for a chronic health condition and you sign up because you agree with me that this is something that would give you the best peace of mind and you want to sign up for a MASA plan today, and you take another trip tomorrow for the same medical condition that you took the trip for yesterday, and you're wondering, will MASA still cover the cost of that, or is there a waiting period? There's no waiting period. If you have a medical emergency, we're going to pay the bill from day one, even for pre-existing medical conditions. What we won't do for the first 90 days is the non-emergent benefit, like rescue your dog if it's a pre-existing condition that takes you. But let me tell you, after that 90-day period is up, you never had a previous health condition in your life as far as we're concerned, and all benefits are available to you after that point. But your emergency medical transportation is still available from day one under all circumstances. And of course, if it's not a pre-existing condition that sent you to the hospital, then all of the benefits are available to you immediately upon signing up. So I hope that kind of clarifies for you all of what we guarantee in a MASA plan. This thing that I'm going to show you is a video, should be coming up on your screen. It's called Skyrage Bills, Debt, and the Lawsuits That Follow. And it was on ABC News. It was very eye-opening to me. I'm going to go ahead and play this for you. And then after this video is over, you can choose to just call 321-443-6839, and we can answer your questions and sign you up. Or you can hang on a little bit longer. I'm going to just, again, review the plan benefits very quickly. And then I'm also going to go over with you the levels of cover, the price plan points that we have for being a MASA member and what those include. So I'm going to go ahead with the video now.
Millions of Americans are rushed to the hospital every year. 400,000 of them transported by emergency helicopter. Many times it's a life or death flight where every second counts. But the service often comes with a sky-high price tag. Tonight, ABC's chief investigative correspondent, Brian Ross, examines the big business of air ambulances.
We're talking about very critically injured patients, traumas, strokes, heart attacks.
Emergency workers call it the golden hour, the crucial 60 minutes to get medical care for a patient facing death.
Failure to get them to the care probably means that they aren't going to survive.
That urgent need to beat the golden hour clock has spawned a nationwide fleet of helicopter ambulances, saving countless lives. But our Nightline investigation, conducted with ABC stations across the country, also found it has left many of the very people it saved facing financial turmoil, with bills as high as $40,000 or $50,000 for a short flight.
Would you call this price gouging?
Well, some of it is. There's no question that some of it is.
Warren Larson of Owensboro, Kentucky, a helicopter pilot himself, says he was stunned at the cost of the quick flight for his daughter after she was injured in a serious off-road ATV accident. $47,000 for 79 miles. After insurance and a failed negotiation, he still owes $36,000.
It's definitely going to cripple us financially.
He is not alone. With our ABC teams across the country, we found hundreds of families.
Some worried to death about it. It's very stressful worrying about it.
Being sued.
I don't have the money to give them, so my wife and my son and myself don't want to be homeless.
Or hounded by debt collectors.
I look, I see the number, I'm like, I know who it is, I don't even want to talk to them.
Over huge bills their insurance won't fully cover.
I feel like I can never dig out.
Some forced into bankruptcy, one after another. Patients told us how they felt they had been taken for a ride in more ways than one.
I wasn't asked if I wanted to go on the helicopter. I didn't think I was hurt that bad.
91-year-old Warren Lowe and his wife Ethel were on their way to church in Virginia when an uninsured driver slammed into their minivan.
911, where's your emergency?
Car wreck here on 89. Several people hurt.
Lowe's leg was shattered, and doctors at his local hospital wanted him sent to a trauma center 55 miles away.
Didn't nobody tell me nothing. They just took me, put me in the helicopter and gone.
The cost, $47,000 for a 20-minute helicopter ride.
I couldn't believe it when I looked at it. $47,000, that's ridiculous.
Jean Medina got a $35,000 bill after her teenage daughter, Sophia, on a family vacation, developed complications from a tonsillectomy.
The surgery itself was a total of $16,000, and the helicopters nearly $35,000. And it just seems a crazy amount of money.
After insurance and a protracted back and forth, she still owes $17,000. And Medina questions whether her daughter's 37-mile medevac trip was even necessary. It took almost an hour for the helicopter to just arrive and load, and she was able to drive the distance in almost the same amount of time.
I left a few minutes before they took off and ended up arriving at the hospital about 5 minutes after they did.
The decision to call in a helicopter ambulance is made by attending doctors. But the families, like the Larsons of Kentucky, are the ones on the hook for the cost. Warren Larson says he was being treated himself, given morphine, when he signed this consent form for his daughter's medevac trip, which in small print made him personally and fully responsible for the bill.
They said, don't worry about it, it's just a standard form. Just give us permission to transport your daughter.
Nowhere on the standard form does it inform the patient or guardian of the expected cost. State insurance regulators say they have been unable to rein in the prices or tactics in other helicopter ambulance services because of a loophole in the federal law. Al Redmer is the insurance commissioner in Maryland.
When the federal government deregulated the airlines industry, these commercial helicopter companies were part of that.
As if they're a major air carrier.
That's exactly right.
So you can't regulate them because of the FAA rule.
That's exactly right.
They can get away with these charges. They can charge, as you say, whatever they want.
They can. They can.
For Nightline, this is Brian Ross, ABC News, New York.
So this is a very ridiculous situation we find ourselves in this country, and unless the federal law changes, then the rules will not change regarding medical air transportation bills, and we're all stuck in the same boat together, just like we are with the coronavirus today. So I'm not going to really explain all of these again in depth, but I'm just going to remind you that for all levels of MASA membership, this plan includes emergency transportation, both ground and air, non-emergency transportation, including return flight home, visitor to the hospital bedside, escort transportation, minor children and grandchild return, vehicle return, pet return, organ transportation, organ recipient transportation, repatriation, and mortal remains transport. If you are looking at becoming a lifetime member, which is a no-brainer for most of our members, then you will also get a MyID Hive medical ID bracelet kit that contains doctor's information, health conditions, medications, supplements, blood type, emergency contacts, and so much more. That can really save your life. You'll have attorney advisory service, a cash advance of up to $50,000 in an emergency, translation service, and emergency message center, which remember can be used even in a non-medical emergency. So becoming a member is very easy. If following this, viewing this online seminar, you call us at 321-443-6839 or click on to the Facebook page for No Ambulance Bills and register. There's a place there where you can make an appointment for a phone consultation. We will ask you your name, your address, your phone number, your birth date, the plan that you choose, and the way that you want to pay for it. And you become covered immediately. And from that moment on, you have peace of mind. So what I'm going to go over with you on this last slide is what are your membership options. I'm going to start at the bottom. I always start with the least expensive and work up to the best value because obviously the lifetime is going to be the one that is a no-brainer for most of you. But we want to make sure that we can offer MASA membership to everybody of every financial circumstance. So I'm going to start with a monthly. A monthly plan in the state of Florida is for a single person $24.17, and for a family, and what we mean by family is any two people living under the same roof, whether or not they're married, but they just have to be in a romantic relationship with each other. So no fathers and sons or daughters and mothers, and any children that they are raising as their own or financially responsible for legally who are 26 years of age or younger. Now I know you're going to notice on the left-hand side of the screen in all of these categories, you'll see the national price and the Florida price. The reason for the difference is because MASA had its first price increase in about 7 years this year. And unfortunately, fortunately for all you Floridians or anybody who purchases from a Florida agent even, In the state of Florida, we're considered an insurance, which means that we have to jump through a few extra hoops and do some extra paperwork and get through some red tape before we can raise our price here to match it everywhere else. So that's an advantage to anybody who buys from a Florida agent today. So moving on up, we have the annual membership. And for a current Florida resident or anyone who buys from a Florida agent, the annual price is $290 for a single and $390 for a family membership. Moving on up, we have what's called the Platinum 5-year membership. And this gets you a little bit of a discount on the price of about $200 to $300, depending if it's a family or a single. And it locks in the price for 5 years. So no price increases for you for 5 whole years. And there are payment plans available for the 5-year and the lifetime. And I can go over those with you on the phone consult. But a current Florida 5-year single membership is $1,305. And for the family membership, it is $1,755. And those payment plans are very affordable, guys. And on the final one that is the best value, that the one that is the no-brainer. Why? Because how many times do you pay for a lifetime plan versus how many times you can use it? It's unlimited. You can use it away from home. You can use it at home. We don't have, a cost limit, and we don't have a usage limit. So a single lifetime membership would be $2,900, and a family lifetime membership is $3,900. We have people who have used their MASA lifetime membership that they purchased back in 1995 for much less money back then, and they're still using it today. We have one family that has had, so far, we've had to fly one member or another across the country to get back home to their primary doctor that they wanted to take care of them, from South Dakota and Florida all the way back up to Massachusetts. And then we also had to move their motorhome twice. And if they need to use us again, we will be there for them every time. It is such a very low amount of money to pay. In fact, those membership costs can be less than single ambulance bills I have seen. So all you have to do to become a member, set an appointment to have a consultation with us. We won't put any pressure on you. If you choose to become a member, you will receive a 30-day money-back guarantee for any level of membership that you purchase, so that you can do your due diligence, check it out. If you change your mind and decide it's not something that you want, we will return the money right to you. And I know there was something else I wanted to say here. Oh, yes. Don't forget, even if you don't want to become a member, you still need to set up your phone consultation with us, and then we'll get your name and address of where to send your $25 gift card to, because you were kind enough to give us your time and watch this seminar. And if you know of anybody else who might benefit or think might be interested in this product, have them either reach out to us by phone or email us. And the email is K.Gobeli at MASAMTSagent.com, or they can contact us on our No Ambulance Bill Facebook page. And noambulancebills@gmail.com is the email for that. And we can get them set up with a view of this webinar, or about 3 times a week starting next week. We're going to do live webinars. We have a live webinar that we're going to do this week as well. So again, the number is 321-443-6839. And I really thank you for paying attention, and I hope you learned something. It was amazing to me when I went through my presentation, and I hope you got a lot out of it.